Here we go. Okay, so welcome to this webinar on affect and the activism, and we're delighted to be joined by Professor David Kack. David, would you like to introduce yourself and say hello to the viewers today?
Yes, hello everyone. Thank you very much for tuning in, if that's what you're actually doing, if that's what you say these days on a webinar. This is my first webinar, actually. This is a new experience for me, so I'm delighted to be here. I'm Professor of Education at the University of Strathclyde. I've been there since 2014. Before that, I began my career in Australia at University of Queensland in 1984. You can try and work out how old I really am from that. And spent some time at Deakin University as well. Returned to the UK in the late 80s and was at Loughborough University, Leeds Metropolitan University and University of Bedfordshire. And now I'm at, as I say, at University of Strathclyde. So I've been doing research in physical education and sport pedagogy for over 35 years, maybe, or so.
Okay, so what would be one of your top research findings that you could share, or something, a key message about one of your research findings?
Oh gosh, that's a tough one, Vicky. That's the easy questions first, eh? A top research finding. Well, so a lot of my work has actually been in the area of how what physical education is socially constructed. So we've taken what we would call in theoretical terms a social epistemological approach to answering the question, what is physical education? What is health and physical education, for those of you who use that kind of terminology? And the answer to that question is very much what people do in the name of physical education. So I think that is a really important headline finding, because it puts teachers, practitioners, and their students, their pupils, very much at the center of what physical education is. So when we try to deal with these very difficult philosophical debates around defining physical education, you know, this ongoing legendary question, what is physical education? My answer to that question is go and look at what people do. What do people who work in a department that says Department of Health and Physical Education across the door of the main office, what do they do in the name of physical education? That's where you'll find your answer to that question.
Okay, brilliant. So I kind of like the way you said about the students and the students being the center, and that was a kind of an interesting link to the idea of perhaps affect. So we were going to talk about the affective domain today. What is the affective domain?
Okay, so the affective domain, this really comes from Bloom's taxonomy. So Benjamin Bloom, back in the 50s, came up with this idea that there were 4 domains of learning. The main one for him, of course, with school education was the cognitive. But then later on was added the physical and the social and the affective. The affective domain really refers to emotions. It refers to feelings. It refers to things like motivation, perseverance, resilience, enjoyment, interest, fun. You know, one of the things we find from a lot of our research, when we talk to physical education teachers and we say to them, what's your main purpose? And they say, well, my kids have fun. And for a long time, I think researchers used to talk down that kind of response. They used to say, oh, well, yeah, okay, right, they have fun, but let's get more serious. You know, educationally, what's important? And teachers were kind of persistent with this. They used to say, no, it's really about fun. They really enjoy themselves. More and more through my career, I've started to get the message from teachers. I've started to understand the affective domain is crucially important. How kids feel about their experience in physical education is absolutely essential. And how we've taught for that, Vicky, in the past is we've said, yeah, we know it's important, but the real thing we're doing is about the physical, you know, teaching physical skills, developing physical fitness, doing physical activity, MBPA. And yeah, if they have fun, that's a useful byproduct of what we're doing. What we're now beginning to realize more and more with our research is that the affective domain actually has to be an explicit educational benefit. It has to be central to our intentions as teachers. So we're not just teaching for this in the hope that it happens, hope that kids become motivated, hope that kids have fun. We're actually saying, how can we design our teaching, learning, curriculum in such a way that kids' learning is in the affective domain, that kids develop interest explicitly because of what we're doing.
So for then, and thinking about the teachers that are probably watching this and engaging in it, so how do we do that in practice? I know you talk about pedagogical strategies. Is that one way, and what might be a strategy, or how can we make learning fun or fun learning?
Well, this is the key question. This is the $1 million question, and many teachers actually are able to do this. They're actually able to design their programs in such a way that their kids are really into what's happening, that they really admire their teacher, they love their teachers. And I think it's been one of the things, I've known this for a long time, you know, even when I was a kid at school a long time ago. My memory is that there were some kids who really identified with their physical education teacher away and above all other teachers in the school. We're talking secondary schools, I guess, at this point. So there was something that those teachers were doing, that they were communicating to those young people, that was important, that the kids were identifying with. So I think that the craft of the teacher, the teacher's own commitment, the teacher's own volition, the teacher's own, sense of the value of what they're doing, is central to this whole process of teaching in the affective domain. And
I know some of your work's been around pedagogical models. Does that link into this idea of the affective domain?
Yeah, very much so, Vicky. So what we've been trying to do, I worked with Kim Oliver from New Mexico State University in Las Cruces, and Kim for many years has been working with girls, adolescent girls in particular, since the late 1990s. In what I would call a pedagogy of affect. She's really been trying to get girls who are mostly, turned off physical education, who are mostly would be seen to be problem students, that's the girls' attitudes, that's the problem, that's the way that people would talk about them. So Kim and I, back in 2013, 2014, spent some time thinking about how could we take all of what we'd learned from Kim's work and other people who've followed Kim's lead. So Emer Enright, for example, Mary O'Sullivan, Jen Fizette, various others. How can we learn from that research and create a pedagogical model for activist, this is the name that Kim gives the work, activist research in physical education. And we come up with three things really as the sort of practice architecture of the pedagogical model for activist research. One is that the first one was that young people value leading a physically active life. And the key issue there is value. We're back in the affective domain. 4 critical elements, student-centered, involve pedagogies of embodiment. For girls, very important issues around body image and so on and so forth. Inquiry-based education centered in action. So in other words, kids find out about things. They identify barriers to their ability to be physically active, and so on and so forth. And the final one is teachers listening to respond over time. So it's not just giving kids voice, but also listening to what they're saying and then responding to what they're saying. And then some of the learning outcomes from that, which was the third element of the practice architecture, was young people, particularly girls, being able to identify barriers to their participation and being able to critique those barriers, and then being able to negotiate their way around those barriers where it was possible.
Okay, and that work from Kim has been applied, hasn't it, in different places? Is there kind of any evidence of the students' responses or teachers' responses to that activist kind of approach?
Yeah, well, if you read Kim's work in detail, and if I could do a wee bit of advertising, so my new book that's just come out in October, which is called Precarity, Critical Pedagogy and Physical Education. In the 8th chapter of that book, the penultimate chapter, I actually give a lot of space to Kim Oliver's work and people who follow Kim. So most recently, Kristen Walseth in Norway, for example, has been doing activist work with co-educational classes, which is what Kim is now doing. So she's working with girls, but in the presence of boys in classes, whereas previously it had just been girls. Almost all of the reports that we have of activist work is very well received by the young people. And teachers are very excited by what they can do differently with young people compared with more traditional approaches to physical education. That's a very, if you like, first level. So yes, people like it. It appeals to them. It's something different, you know. The fact that girls are actually asked their opinions, adolescent girls are taken seriously. The teacher say to them, what do you think? That in itself is so empowering for these young people. So we have I think a lot of the level in itself is actually quite powerful. Moving beyond that, does this approach have power beyond the unit of work, the term, the academic year? We don't know. I don't think anybody's really done any work beyond this initial encounter, initial contact of teachers with young people. One of the things we've been trying to do with Kim's work and using this model that we've developed is to ask the question, can teachers learn to use an activist approach? Is it only test pilots who can fly the activist model, you know? Do you have to be as good as Kim Oliver or Emer Enright? Do you have to be such a super teacher to use this? And the same question's been asked of other pedagogical models like TGFU, Teaching Games for Understanding, and so on. So we did a study recently in Glasgow, where in 4 Glasgow schools, where we introduced 5 teachers to this approach, and basically Kim taught them how to use it. And I think the answer to the question, can we scale this up, at least on the small scale, is yes, we can. Yeah, teachers can learn to use this. They don't find it easy, and the more experienced they are, typically they're so socialized into the ways of working traditionally, that it can be quite, at some levels, quite traumatic. But we've got a couple of papers now out that have been published that have discussed this issue around teacher professional learning, and we're fairly confident to say to others, yes, it's possible.
Yeah, and I think there's some really interesting, so we've got a block of content on these webinars, and one of the webinars has been on by Professor Heather Widdows, and it talked about everyday lookism and the idea of having body image and the kind of lookism campaigns. And it says, rather than starting with what's the ideal body or what's not the ideal body, or having the different type of bodies, start with young people's experiences about themselves and their bodies, and build learning and understanding around education around that. And she's then linked that to social media in terms of getting campaigns going and thinking about how teachers might do this in school. So I know you've written a book chapter around this in the book, Young People's Social Media and Health. So how might an activist approach and the effective domain link to young people in social media?
Well, the first thing that came to mind when you were talking there, Vicky, was back to, you know, some of the big headline things that I've learned over those 35 years. And what I'd have to say is that on top of the social constructionist thing that people make physical education, is that the local situation is paramount. So we can never get away from the fact that particular schools in particular places, that's where the action has to be. So echoing your point, that we don't start with, you know, abstract sort of notions of body image and so on. We start with where the young people are, which is very much a starting point for the activist approach. You know, it's about finding out how young people feel about themselves, what their concerns are, what their local issues are. And it's only in that context that we can then start to build, innovative new programs. This is the whole thing about pedagogical models too. And I know I'm not answering your question about the chapter, but I'll get there. So this is the thing about pedagogical models too. They try to deal with the tension between ideas that come from external to the local context, from people like you and me, who are researchers, who work in universities, who have global networks, and so on and so forth, and people who are very rooted in particular places, in particular contexts. So pedagogical models attempt to, they are design specifications that teachers and others can use to make programs that work in their local context, that meet the needs and interests of young people in particular places. So that's a prelude to talking about, some of the strategies around the chapter that you mentioned. So there's a few things that I say in that chapter. One of them is around teachers' capabilities of developing critical health literacy, and the whole issue of whether teachers themselves can actually be, in a sense, role models, influencers. Is that a word that you use in the social media world?
Yeah.
Influencers for young people in terms of how you can use social media in a productive, safe way, and of course the literature really is the jury's out on that, a lot of the evidence that we have, and there's not very much of it, but what's there suggests that teachers aren't really well placed to be role models for young people, because young people tell us that adults don't really understand how they experience the social media world. So that's one issue, is the extent to which teachers can facilitate the development of critical health literacies, of understanding social media and the messages it sends around health and well-being, and then being critical of that. How credible can teachers be in that context? So that's one issue. Another issue is the extent to which teachers, can learn to use these pedagogies of effect. So I've already talked about that with respect to the activist model, and I do think that this really needs to come from teachers' own perceptions of what's important in their local context. I don't think that we can take a general sort of position on this and say all teachers must now learn to use pedagogies of effect, because some teachers will say, well, why? This is not important for me. This is not what my kids need. So back to the book I was talking about. So one of the things I've been interested in recently has been the growth of this phenomenon of precarity, where young people are living precarious lives, and the precariousness is damaging their health and well-being, particularly their mental health, their feelings of continuity in life, of having a future, of stability, of any kind of certainty. And this is all linked typically to adult employment conditions and how those have been eroded over time through the gig economy, through temporary work and periods of unemployment and so on. So this whole issue of precarity, if teachers are faced more and more, if they're confronted more and more by young people who are feeling angry, who are feeling anxious, who are alienated, whose behavior is not appropriate to the school context, how do teachers deal with this? What can they do to help the situation? And yeah, we can do, teachers' schools can do what's been happening in England increasingly, which is to put difficult pupils into referral units. That's what we do. We take the troublesome kids, we put them somewhere special that they're out of the way, they don't count in the statistics, they don't count for the academic scores, and so on and so forth. This has been documented. There's been a massive rise in the number of kids in primary schools in particular who've been sent to referral units. But that's not the way for us to be dealing with kids who are growing up in difficult circumstances. And the key thing is that there's been there's been a sea change in this. It's not just about, there's always been children living in poverty, always been. And it's not just about an increase in the number of children living in poverty, although that has been happening and it's well documented. On top of that is this precariousness, this uncertainty, this instability. This is what's been eroding a lot of young people's health and well-being. If physical education teachers aren't part of the agenda in dealing with this, then what are they supposed to be doing? For me, this is a key issue. So coming back to your point about the chapter, I think more and more physical education teachers need to be experiencing pedagogies of effect, need to be learning how to use them, because more and more teachers are going to be finding kids who are in this sort of situation. And I think that this is about lifelong learning. I think the idea is gone. I don't know. Maybe the teacher population out there will tell me that I'm wrong, but I think the idea is gone that you do your training, your 4 years plus 1, or your 3 years plus 2, or whatever it is, and that's you. You're ready, set for a lifetime of teaching. That used to be the notion when I was doing my undergraduate preparation in the 1970s. That was us set for life. We would never have to do anything else. But I think that even my generation was very quickly disabused of that notion. So this is very much on the job learning. I think it's very much about school-based professional learning for teachers, in situ, maybe in local sort of communities and areas that are sort of have similar circumstances where teachers are saying, okay, Vicky Goodyear, please come on down, help us out with this particular situation. Where can you help us to take this situation forward, or whatever?
So a lot of the debate around in our discussions at the moment and on this course and on various different aspects has been, should social media be used in schools, and should social media be used in physical education or PSHE? So based on your ideas of affect and pedagogies of effect, what would be your advice to teachers in how they should be using or engaging with social media?
Tricky. I have to be upfront and admit, that I don't use social media. I've never been involved with it. It's and it may be a generational thing, although I know that many people my age or around my generation do use it, but I've never done it. So I can only speak from a distance on this, and what I know about this is I've learned from other people and their own uses. Even my children, who are in their 20s, I don't think are very regular users of social media, although I think they were in their teens. And so I don't know, maybe it's a generational thing. Maybe kids go through a phase, maybe from whenever to whenever they're very engaged with this, and then they kind of grow out of it. I don't know. At one level, I'd almost be kind of skeptical that social media is a lifelong preoccupation, that maybe they can be weaned off it somehow or other, or that it becomes less important to them, or, but I think that where we've got the biggest concerns about social media is where kids are going through those very, very formative years of childhood and adolescence, where, other people's opinions of them and so on and so forth are just so important to their own sense of self and self-esteem, and it's such a formative process. What can teachers do in that context? Well, in the chapter that you mentioned, I do talk about Neil Postman and his comment in the pre-digital age, where he thought television was the big challenge, where he was saying that American schools have yet to teach young people to be critical of literature, and then to never mind popular culture as it appeared on TV. So schools don't seem to be terribly geared up towards, where they do critique of literature and so on. It's in a very sort of formal way, and it's, so I think we're talking about a new, there's a whole new sort of, it's not a new field, but a new sort of space opening up. Yeah. About how schools deal with social media. I mean, there are schools that have got very, very, excuse me, very, very strict limits on what websites and so on that kids can actually access from the school. There's big barriers in place in terms of internet access. So immediately you're kind of hamstrung in terms of what you can do from the school as a site.
Yeah.
So I just think it's an enormously fraught problem. It's not one that I think schools can ignore. I think that the project that you, Kathy, and Hannah have been involved in has been incredibly important in terms of, along with the other researchers who've begun to research these issues, in terms of understanding better how young people use social media, and that has to be the starting point for all of this. Teachers really need to read your book. They need to look at your data. They need to look at the case studies. They need to understand how young people are using social media before they themselves can have any kind of positive contribution to the process.
And I think that links nicely to some of the things that we've been picking up on. So whilst the young people will tell us that there's also gaps between adults and young people's understanding of social media. Adults, and from the event that you were involved in back in Birmingham in 2017, one of the key findings was that, yes, adults aren't necessarily on social media, but they have a knowledge base to bring. So, the period of adolescence in terms of them listening to their peers more than perhaps adults, the risk-taking behavior, the kind of changes, you talked about the girls, the changes in physical activity engagement, the whole kind of bits around young people. And I suppose you've written two papers on, or a book chapter and a paper on social media. So you've been able to bring knowledge from other places to tackle the situation of young people. So I think adults and teachers have a really strong thing to bring to this. So I suppose it's the $1 million question that everyone's is there any kind of way how can teachers optimize on the benefits or harness the benefits of social media for young people? Because it's not going anywhere, I don't think.
Yeah, so I guess one of the things that we comment on is in relation to the sort of information young people can access on health and well-being is how appropriate is it, how trustworthy is it, and are teachers the trusted source of information? And I was reading the other day about newspapers like The Guardian and websites like BBC News and so on, and how important they were in terms of being trusted sources of information in a world where misinformation is flying around all the time. So if you take that as a kind of situation writ large, about just fake news and so on everywhere, and then you take it down to health and well-being information and how it's accessed by young people, who would be the trusted source? And health and physical education teachers have to be playing that role. They have to, for me, they have to be the place where kids can go and they can trust what is actually being presented to them. Some of which might be in total contrast to what they're encountering in relation to what's coming through in social media. I think your case studies show quite nicely, how the algorithms and all the rest of it, and how kids can be sucked into a whole stream of information that is nothing they've been looking for themselves. It just comes to them because of who their friends are and what their friends have been searching and so on and so forth. So, yeah, I do think that physical education, health and physical education has to be seeing itself as having a key role there, not to sort of tell kids, no, this is we're right and they're wrong, but maybe helping kids to maybe being mediators in this whole process of how information is received and how kids make sense of it.
So the last question then, so what would be your top tip for somebody about to tackle young people's social media and health?
Top tip? Wow. Well, apart from saying don't use social media, am I not allowed to say that? Yeah, gosh. Top tip for teachers, do you mean?
Yeah.
Or top tip for kids?
Oh, that's interesting. Top tip for kids. Both.
Well, because if we're going to teach critical health literacy, then tip for kids has to always be skeptical about what you're reading. Always be asking the question: is this real? Is this true? Is this trustworthy? Is this, always having a level of skepticism, not being sucked into, and that should be a sort of default setting. It should be not that you're cynical, not that you're finding fault constantly or whatever, not that you can never be enthused, motivated, inspired by something, but at the same time always having that wee sort of bullshit antenna going up, being able to sort of identify. So for kids, top tip has to be, and that has to be the outcome of good education around critical health literacy. Kids are able to be skeptical of, to always be taking that backward step and saying, is this really true? Is this really helpful for me? Is this what I need? Can I get other information from other sources that aren't social media based? Top tip for teachers, I guess, has to be, regardless of your enthusiasm for this, recognize the limitations of what you can actually contribute. If young people are skeptical of your with itness with social media, it's a kind of, it's one of these generational things, and maybe younger teachers, okay, they can be convincing. They can say, yeah, I've been in there and done this. Vicky, one of the things that I found really quite scary when I came to that Birmingham event was how naive some young people are in terms of what they post on these sites.
Yeah.
And how much of a trace that leaves. I was reading the other day about a US senator. Is it a senator? Is it Katie Hill or something? Oh, no, maybe I've got some celebrity, I don't know. But it was somebody called Hill, I think, who's resigned because nude photos have appeared of her on the internet somewhere. And there was one kind of cynical commentator on this saying, how many young people now who've got no idea they're going to be politicians in 20 years' time already have these pictures circulating, because it's so easy with your camera and your phone with the camera and all the rest of it. Something would never have been, possible in my generation, for example. And then the traces that get left with these things. And so, so I guess that's coming back to the kids being top tip, be very skeptical, be very careful in terms of what you post. For young teachers, being very careful about what you put up, always using pseudonyms, for example, seems to be the thing to do so that you can't identify by your real name. Yeah, and I think for teachers to be incredibly careful as well as, honest about their own position on all of this stuff.
So thank you for that. So where can people go to find out more of about your types of tips that you give to teachers and more about your research, and where would you direct them to find?
Well, we have I have a webpage at University of Strathclyde, which would be the main sort of landing pad, if you like, if you wanted to come and find out what's been published. I'm sorry, but I don't do podcasts or tweets or any of that sort of stuff. So you're never going to get the one line sort of thing from me. But if you're interested in the slightly longer version of things, then that would be one place to go to for sure. Yeah. And
your latest book
is called, yes, Precarity, Physical Education and Critical Pedagogy, published by Routledge last month. I think the e-book is already out. So although the hardcover, just to explain to folks who don't understand, so the publishing companies, they put books out in hardcover. They cost hundreds of pounds, but they're aimed at university libraries, and the whole idea is that they're robust enough to stand students, using them a lot. The soft cover will come once they've sold enough of the hardcover, and then they have the ebook version, and the ebook version's like a third or fourth of the price that you can easily access. So it's a good read.
Yes, and people from the University of Birmingham, we have that in our library, so you're very
Okay,
lucky.
well done. I think the first one I've heard of who's actually managed to order it. Good.
So brilliant. Thank you ever so much, David. I hope everybody has enjoyed watching, if you're watching live or on a replay. Hopefully this has been helpful, but thank you ever so much.
You're welcome.